In Das Kapital, Karl Marx famously wrote, "As capitalist, he is only capitalist personified. His soul is the soul of capital, but capital has one single life impulse, the tendency to create value and surplus value, to make it constant factor, the means of production, absorb the greatest possible amount of surplus labor. Capital is dead labor, that, vampire-like, only lives by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks." Now, the reason why I'm quoting this filthy communist economic fanfiction is because it plays a central role in the main thesis that I want to argue in this video, how Hayao Miyazaki's magnum opus, Spirited Away, explores how capitalism robs people of their identity and humanity. Now, before I explore how exactly Miyazaki did this, I first have to talk about capitalism itself. Now, capitalism is a very complicated system that can't be defined by like one sentence, and this isn't an economics video, but for the sake of this thesis, here's the important thing to keep in mind. In a capitalist economy, it is defined by two groups, producers and consumers. The goal of the producers is to maximize as much profit as possible, because not only does maximizing profits allow them to make a shitload of cash, but they can also satisfy the ever-growing demand of consumers who want to consume as much shit as possible. And when consumers want to consume as much shit as possible, they will continue consuming all that shit to the maximum amount possible, which will not only result in profit for the producers, but will also incentivize them to continue producing them to gain more profit while minimizing costs. Okay? Okay, now in concept there's nothing really wrong with this process, and in many ways capitalism has greatly benefited the world both economically and just in general, but at the cost of all this convenient and pleasurable stuff that is produced in mass and available consumers to enjoy, both groups within the system always tend to forget one thing that is always exploited and thrown by the wayside, the human aspect, which is personified by the workers. History has proven time and time again that both the producers and consumers at the top 1% will not hesitate to dehumanize the workers despite being responsible for their wealth in the first place, because they prioritize money and capital over everything else. To them, workers are just cogs in a machine, tools to help them achieve their goals, and while they will throw in some incentives to keep these workers somewhat complacent and motivated, throwing money doesn't make a situation better. It just reminds the people that not only are their lives tied to it, but it can easily be taken away from them if they don't live up to their usefulness. Now, what does this have to do with Spirited Away? Well, everything, because as the film explicitly showcases, capitalism is pretty much the driving force that motivates most of the characters in the film. Specifically two, Yubaba and No Face. Let's start with Yubaba, who in many ways share similarities with captains of industry like Andrew Carnegie and Cornelius Vanderbilt, who were called that because they were the leaders of their respective fields, which in their cases is steel and railroads. Yubaba is also a captain of her own industry, which is the bathhouse, and she very much runs her business like a capitalist. She's got this huge, ostentatious building filled with fancy baths and decorations. It's occupied by hundreds of workers who each have their own roles and responsibilities, and aside from those few moments where workers get to sleep and eat, their lives are completely tied to their job. And all this is in service to profit the one person at the top, both metaphorically and literally, Yubaba. At the end of the day, the one thing that Yubaba values above all else is wealth. There are several scenes in Spirited Away in which we watch Yubaba counting the number of coins she has or examining how rare a jewel is. Profit is the only thing that's on her mind, so when she's being warm and hospitable to potential customers, she's doing it not out of the kindness of her heart, but because she sees another wallet that she can extract money from if she provides good service. Plus, at the end of the day, it's not her who has to deal with customers like the River Spirit or No Face. She's not the one who has to clean up the sludge and pour blood, sweat, and tears into providing that good service. It's the workers, and yet she gets the most benefit out of their work. So it's no wonder why the workers immediately rush to No Face when he becomes a hot commodity. He can produce gold right from his fucking fingertips. It's more money than they probably will ever make working under Yubaba. It's why one of the employees mentions to collect as much gold as possible before Yubaba finds out, because she'll most likely snatch all the moolah for herself when she does. And this blatant disregard for her workers leads me to the second point that I wanted to talk about with Yubaba, and it's the way she dehumanizes her employees. Now, how does she do this? By stealing their names and replacing them with a new one. When Chihiro asks Yubaba for employment, she forces the young girl to sign a contract, and what she does, Yubaba changes her name from Chihiro to Sen, which in kanji means 1,000. Now, whether or not this implies that Yubaba is branding Chihiro as the 1,000th worker for her bathhouse is up to your interpretation, but overall, the main thing to take away is that the reason Yubaba rebrands Chihiro as Sen is because she wants her to forget her real name. She's trying to strip away Chihiro's identity, because if she forgets her name, she loses not just her identity, but also her humanity and her purpose for working in the first place. Chihiro works not out of some desire to get rich like Yubaba does, she works because she wants to free her parents from being pigs, and it's clear that Yubaba wants to turn Chihiro into just another cog in the machine. Another worker she can just use for her own benefit while erasing whatever her needs are. And what's so frightening about this tactic is that it almost works on her. Shortly after Chihiro gets hired and meets up with Haku to see her parents, she already starts referring to herself as Sen, not as Chihiro. And what I love about this moment is that even though it's only been like a day, or at least it felt like a day, has passed since Chihiro was hired, she has already forgotten her real name. She had already lost her identity, and if Haku hadn't reminded her of what her real name was, it might have been lost forever. I also find it ironic that Haku is the one who reminds Chihiro of her identity because he himself also doesn't remember his own name. Haku explains to Chihiro that Yubaba controls people by taking away their names, and when they forget, they can never leave the spirit world, something that he knows all too well because he himself is trapped under Yubaba's thumb. And I think that's what makes this scene where Chihiro cries while eating just so emotionally powerful. It's personally my favorite moment in the entire film. This is probably one of the few moments where she doesn't have to think about work or worry about her safety. This is one of the few moments where she can just stop and think about just how shitty her life is. One of the few moments where she can let her emotions out, remind herself that at the end of the day, despite how she's being treated, she's still human. We're all human. We all have needs, feelings, desires, all of which are tossed aside to be cogs in a machine because the machine known as capitalism doesn't care about humanity. It just cares about numbers and profits. And you can basically use this phrase to sum up Yubaba's character. While she does have a bit of humanity inside her, like the fact that she obviously loves her son, but at the end of the day, if she's so obsessed with wealth that she couldn't immediately recognize that this rat was Bo and this was a fake, what does that really say about her humanity? Now going back to wealth, let's talk about the other side of the capitalist coin, no face. Now if Yubaba represents the excess of the producers of capitalism, then no face represents the excess of consumers of capitalism. As you no doubt remember, when no face enters the bathhouse, it starts eating and eating and eating with absolutely no end in sight. Because at the end of the day, when no face has the power to create literal gold from his fingers, then why would he ever need to stop? He can keep consuming, and so he will keep consuming until he feels some sort of satisfaction, which I doubt he'd ever reach. Capitalism is a system that actively encourages spending and consumption, and because there's so much demand for so many consumer goods, will there ever be a point where we can truly be satisfied? Or are we just cursed to continue spending and eating just like No Face? But it's strange though, while I have very little sympathy for Yubaba, I feel nothing but sympathy for No Face, and the reason I feel this way is because unlike Yubaba, whose happiness is tied to capitalism, No Face's happiness is the result of capitalism. And we see throughout the film, No Face is a literal lost soul who is often ignored and mistreated. He just wants to feel some semblance of happiness, of love, of fucking identity. I mean, his name is No Face, for crying out loud. That's the reason why No Face goes on this binging spree, because as he watches the workers and figures out that they're motivated by money and profit, he assumes that he can simply buy the happiness that he so dreamed of. He can finally be someone, and to the workers, he is someone. He's the guy who can give them money. But when he tries to buy Chihiro's love, she simply refuses because she doesn't care about wealth. She just cares about saving her family. And the fact that No Face can't buy Chihiro's love really pisses him off. And I think this is something that you can probably imply about a lot of people who have a ton of money. They earn so much wealth to the point that they can live the most comfortable and luxurious life in the world. But if all that comfort and wealth doesn't give them any joy or happiness, then at the end of the day, what does it matter if they own the hottest sports car or yacht or mansion? I can't really speak for these types of people since I'm not living their lives, but what I can speak to is that sometimes being a winner at the game of capitalism doesn't really make you a true winner, if you know what I mean. Now that's not to say you would suddenly be happier if you had no money, that's ridiculous, but what I'm saying is, will you truly be happy even after swimming in a Scrooge McDuck money pool? No Face didn't gain happiness because of his wealth, he only gained the delusion of happiness. But at the end of the day though, as much as I've been harping about how much Spirited Away critiques capitalism and its worst vices, that doesn't mean that Miyazaki outright disdains the system. While Yubaba and No Face do represent the worst of capitalism, there is a way that you can make the most of it and do well for yourself without having to indulge in such greed and excess. For example, Chihiro represents humanity, the light that is often missing from capitalism. Not only is Chihiro a hard worker who wants to do the best she can at her job, but she also does what she does for her loved ones. She works so that she can free her parents from their curse. And while last time I checked, people today aren't afflicted with magic curses or anything, you can still interpret this noble goal as simply making just enough to provide for yourself and your family/loved ones. It won't be easy, and it will probably take you years for you to truly reap the benefits of your work, but you will eventually meet your goal and live a reasonably comfortable life, and at the end of the day, that's simply what many just hope to achieve. Additionally, I'd even go so far as to say that Miyazaki doesn't believe there's nothing inherently evil or wrong about simply being super financially successful. For example, when you compare the homes of Yubaba and her twin sister Zeniba, you can see just how differently they view money and success. While both live in very big homes with lots of space and comfort, Zeniba is much more modest and complacent with what she's achieved and is perfectly happy living the rest of her life with the wealth that she's gained. But for Yubaba, she's the complete opposite. Enough is simply never enough, and she will keep gaining more and more wealth to make her gigantic ass tower bigger and more gigantic-y. The film even says Yubaba and Zeniba are two halves of a whole, but they don't get along. And while there are a lot of ways that the twins differ, one of the more obvious ones is how they measure success and wealth. And keep in mind that it's also no coincidence that when No Face was at Yubaba's house, he only had the delusion of happiness and belonging. But when he stays at Zeniba's house, he actually feels a sense of belonging, happiness, and most importantly, identity. At the end of the day though, whether you're rich or poor, a producer or a consumer, we should remember that we're still human. Capitalism can rob both producers and consumers of their identity and humanity, and it's easy to simply let all that go in the name of profit and consumption, but we can't let that happen. We always need to remember that everything that you produce and consume, whether it's an Amazon package, or a manufactured car, or a new hit movie or TV show, there's always a person or persons responsible for making that happen, and we should always be aware and grateful for that work that was put into making capitalism run. And we should always be aware and grateful for the people who put in the work to making capitalism run as well as it does. If we don't, then we're no better than these guys. Chihiro represents the humanity of capitalism, and so we should all strive to be like her.